I'm Steph, aka Literati Medium, and today, because March is my birthday month, I'm going to celebrate by doing the Name Game book tag. So I initially saw this tag on Madison Goodyear's channel, and I believe the original was created by Words in Time, so I'll link both their channels down below so you can check them out. Madison did the Name Game book tag Favorites edition, and I believe she got that idea from Treebeard's book reviews because he did the fantasy edition. So I'm going to do a twist on both of those and do the YA fantasy edition. So like they did, I'm going to first give you recommendations based on books that I enjoyed and have read, and then I'm going to give you books that I want to read. So for S, we have The Summoning by Kelley Armstrong. I read these books probably about a decade ago now, and they were my first introduction to Kelley Armstrong. I had no idea that she was actually a paranormal romance writer, and I really enjoyed this series. She had this really nice blend of like the familiar YA tropes, but also this touch of horror that I was not used to reading in YA fantasy, and I really appreciated that. It tells the story of Chloe, who can see spirits, and she gets sent to a group home for troubled teens, where she finds out that the other teens in the house also have unique abilities. All right, for T, I have Talking to Dragons by Patricia C. Wrede. Daysar's mother always taught him to be polite to dragons. When his mom hands him a magic sword and kicks him out of the house, he has no idea what he's supposed to do. So this is actually the fourth book in the Enchanted Forest Chronicles, which I've talked about on this channel before. But what's interesting is that it was the first book that I read of this series because I didn't realize it was a part of the series at the time. And I will say this book does work as a standalone novel because I didn't feel like I was missing any of the story when I read it. But then when I went back and read the other books, I realized just how much was put into that fourth book. But you don't necessarily need books 1 through 3. I would say you could probably read book 1 by itself and book 4 by itself without any problem. But once you get to book 2, you have to kind of read book 2 and book 3 together. This series is just whimsical and fun and a great read, and Argylfraster is still a thing in my family. So next we have Entwined by Heather Dixon Walwork. When Azalea's mother dies, she and her 11 sisters are kind of shut away in mourning, and her father goes off to war. With the isolation of that and being trapped in their rooms, they actually discover a secret passageway that leads to a magical world where they get to dance all night. And in that magical world is the Keeper, a man who has been stuck in this world as a kind of magical prison. Because dancing is such a relief to the girls in this isolation, the Keeper invites them to come each night, but there's gonna be a cost for that. So I love the 12 Dancing Princesses as a story as a whole. And I honestly think this is maybe where my love of epic fantasy started because of the world that is laid out in the 12 Dancing Princesses story with the Silver Forest and all of that. And I have to say, I get excited every single time I come across a retelling of this story. I also really liked that, as opposed to other tellings of this story, the father doesn't come off as a tyrant. He comes off as a grieving man, and that was a really nice change to see. All right, next we have The Forbidden Game by L.J. Smith. And I'm cheating a little bit here because The Forbidden Game is the name of the trilogy and not each of the individual books. I've talked about this a little bit on my channel already, where I loved this book so much growing up that I literally wore out my copy of it. Although I will say the second book definitely suffers from a sophomore slump. In the first book, Jenny buys a game for her boyfriend's birthday that's like a haunted house game. Through a series of strange events, she actually ends up getting sucked into the game with her friends, where they have to go through the house and face each one of their worst nightmares. And they discover that they've been lured there by Julian, an ancient, mysterious man who keeps saying that he's in love with Jenny. And this may be where my love of morally gray villains started. For A, we have Alanna, the first adventure, and what YA fantasy list would be complete without something from the Tortle series, right? Oh, and if you don't know, this series is written by Tamora Pierce. And in this book, Alanna wants to become a knight and her twin brother wants to become a mage. So in order to make their dreams come true, they decide to switch places. So I love a good gender bender story. And this was actually one of the first fantasy books I read where the protagonist was a female, and that was really good to read growing up. These books are classics for a reason, and they mostly hold up to today, and I have read every single book in this series with, I think, the exception of the last Becca Cooper book, because that came out when I was in the middle of my reading slump. For N, we have The Naming by Alison Croggon. So Wrede was captured as a slave after her family was killed. It turns out that she's exhibiting abilities that show that she may be part of the school of Pellinor. She is discovered by Cadvin, a bard of Lyragon, and he takes her under his wing and teaches her about her heritage. So I would say this series could very easily cross it over into the epic fantasy genre, but when it came out, it was definitely marketed as more of YA fantasy. I remember really liking this series, and I thought that it was really cool to have a magic system that was based on music. For I, we have Into the Land of the Unicorns by Bruce Coville. Okay, so this is technically a middle grade series, but I love it so much that I'm putting it on this list anyway. So Kara only half believes that she's gonna survive when her grandmother tells her to jump off a bell tower when they're in danger. But she does it, and she ends up in a magical world and befriending a young unicorn named Lightfoot. And they end up on an epic adventure to save all of the unicorns. This book is available on Kindle, I believe, and maybe Audible. It's really difficult to find physical copies of these books, but they're so good. I tracked down all 4 of them for my niece for Christmas a few years ago. It's just such a wonderful fantasy adventure for kids who grew up loving unicorns, or loving the movie Legend like I did. And the last letter in my name is E, and I'm gonna go with Enna Burning by Shannon Hale. So Enna's brother finds a piece of vellum that teaches him how to light fire without any kind of kindling. Enna's not entirely sure she wants to learn this ability, but when a war breaks out in Bayern, she'll find she doesn't have very much choice. So this is the second book in the Books of Bayern series, and I really enjoyed this book. Was it my favorite YA series? No. Was it still really enjoyable? Yeah. Alright, so before we get into the books that I want to read, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more bookish content. And also, if any of these books sounded interesting to you, or if you've read any of them, let me know in the comments. If you want to read them and haven't, I do have the affiliate links down in my description box below, which all that means is I may make a small commission if you were to purchase through those links. All right, so now let's get into the books that I want to read that spell my name. The first one is Scythe by Neil Shusterman. So I've heard really great things about this trilogy. All I really know about it is that it's set in a world where death has essentially been eradicated and the scythes exist to kind of deal with population control. This sounded like such an interesting premise, and I want to read it because I want to use it as research for a story idea that I have. For T, we have Touch of Power by Maria V. Snyder. So Avery is a healer in a world where healers are blamed for a plague that's been spreading throughout the territories. She then gets abducted by a band of rogues, and they actually really value her skills. And their leader demands that she heal the prince, who basically was responsible for leading the charge against healers in the first place. And I think that this is a really intriguing premise. I really liked the study series that Maria did, and I'm looking forward to reading this one, and it seems like there might be a good enemies to lovers trope, and you know how I love that. For E, we have An Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahir. So I've had the first 2 books on my shelves literally for years and have yet to read them. All I really know about it is that the main character's brother gets arrested for treason and that she becomes a spy. Next we have Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Booley. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. And this is about Donis, again, name pronunciations, I'm sorry, who is biracial, and she's struggling to fit in both in her hometown and the nearby reservation until she meets Jamie, who she's kind of simultaneously charmed by and who she thinks there's something up with him. And that's proven right when she witnesses a murder and gets pulled into the middle of a murder investigation. So this, I have been told, is a fantasy, but it sounds more like a thriller, and I'm now really intrigued because I want to see where the fantasy comes in. For A, we have All of Us Villains by Amanda Foody and Christine Lynn Herman. During the blood moon, 7 families have a tournament to the death, and the reward is that they get power over this wellspring of magic. However, before this current tournament is going on, I guess there was a tell-all book that was published. So now everybody's watching what's going on. I've seen it on TikTok a lot lately, and it just seems like a fun Hunger Games, but with magic. Next, we have Nocturne by Maya Motain. All I really know about this is that there's a prince and there's a thief that can change their face, and that they released something and now they have to fight it. That's all I really know about this, but it sounds super intriguing, and I like that it's set in a Latinx world, and it just seems like a fun time. For I have Incendiary by Zoraida Cordova. So Renata, I guess, has the special ability to steal memories, except the king uses that against her own people. So she gets rescued by a group of spies and becomes one of them, except that I guess when her boyfriend gets kidnapped, she has to go undercover to rescue him. And I'm kind of getting the vibes that there's going to be a bit of a love triangle here between the boyfriend and maybe the prince. And I'm not sure how I feel about that, but again, the prince, you've got enemies to lovers, so I also really enjoyed The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina by Zoraida Cordova, so I'm looking forward to reading this one. So it seems only fitting that I started this book tag with Kelley Armstrong, and that I should maybe finish it with Kelley Armstrong. So the last book that I want to read is Empire of Night by Kelley Armstrong. I'm not going to talk about this too much because it's actually the second book in a series, and I read the first one last year, which if you want to know my thoughts of that, you can check it out here. But again, I'm excited to finish this series. There's that great blend of YA adventure mixed with horror, and I'm excited to read it. All right, and since I wasn't officially tagged in this video, I'm not really gonna tag anybody, but if this seems like a fun tag to you, please feel free to do it and let me know when you do so I can watch it. And if you made it to this point in the video, go ahead and leave me a dagger emoji, because that seems to be a thing in YA fantasy lately. Let's see what stories tomorrow brings.